For this video, we're going to do something a little different. As you might have gathered already, my previous videos focused on Fallout YouTubers who left YouTube for some reason or another. This time we're not going to be discussing a Fallout YouTuber, but instead a Fallout creator who left the company that he was a founding member of. Chris Avellone was born on September 27, 1971 in Alexandria, Virginia, where he also attended high school. He graduated from the College of William and Mary with an English major. After college, Chris would begin dabbling with fantasy writing by writing campaigns for Dungeons & Dragons. In 1995, Chris began to work within the game industry as a video game designer. Chris had helped to develop games like Star Trek Starfleet and Descent to Undermountain, a game Chris felt was a disappointment in the end. In 1998, a small division of developers were dubbed Black Isle Studios, and it was under this development team Chris Avellone would help design Fallout 2, a classic RPG that many hold dearly, and some even hail as one of the best RPGs of all time. Chris Avellone would continue to work on many different projects with Black Isle Studios until its eventual bankruptcy in 2003. Seeing the writing on the wall, 5 members of Black Isle Studios would create Obsidian Entertainment shortly before the foreclosure of Black Isle. Those 5 members were Fargus Ugart, Chris Parker, Chris Jones, Darren Monahan, and Chris Avellone. Under Obsidian Entertainment, Chris would carve out a name for himself as a respected RPG designer and writer. During this time, Chris would be accredited as a designer and writer for titles such as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, Neverwinter Nights and its sequel, and of course, the fan favorite, Fallout New Vegas. While he didn't write for most of the core game of New Vegas, he was credited as a lead designer on the DLC content Lonesome Road and Old War Blues, 2 DLCs that are largely praised as some of the best writing in the series. With a resume like Chris has, it would make one ponder why Obsidian would decide to let him go in 2015. When he first departed, it was portrayed as if Chris was simply moving on to new endeavors. He was quoted as wishing Obsidian and its employees well and looking forward to future projects. Most of the statements early in Chris's departure seem like your generic cookie-cutter company responses, best wishes, etc. But after having a few years to stew on his past with Obsidian, Chris's tone began to change. This all seems to change around 2018. Whenever Chris was brought up as a key writer for Fallout New Vegas on Twitter, he would playfully pass the buck on to Josh Sawyer or John Gonzalez, making it clear that he played a small role in the main story and was mostly credited with the DLC writing. As time went on, he seemed to become more bitter about his history with New Vegas. Chris also began to take shots at the upper management of Obsidian around this time. This one in particular I find interesting. Avellone is expressing his desire to see Fargus, one of the men who helped create Obsidian, to no longer be his own boss. I think most people will interpret this as a jab at Fargus's management skills. Avellone attributed the controversial decision to make Outer Worlds an Epic Store exclusive to Obsidian management, relenting that they had one job. It makes one ponder, why would a man who is one of the founding members harbor what seems like resentment to his ex-co-workers in studio, for which he had worked with such passion? Well, you need not look far. Since then, Chris Avellone has participated in a few interviews where he talks about his rocky departure from Obsidian and the shady demands that Obsidian had wanted in order to let him do such. The most illuminating is a long and detailed interview by TechRaptor with Chris Avellone, of which I will read a few highlights from, and that really paint a picture of the atmosphere and turbulence being experienced at Obsidian Entertainment. I didn't get anything when I left Obsidian. There were no share payouts, no equity, and this was in addition to the other logistical problems around the departure. The sudden cancellation of my health insurance, problems with my 401k, errors in Obsidian's accounting, and several existing independent contracts they refused to uphold. Realizing my family issues and debts therein, however, they did make an attempt to leverage that into a far more confining separation agreement that would remove my right to work on RPGs, and silence me on all issues that would pertain to Obsidian or any other company they were involved with, where the CEO had any kind of percent in. This included an inability to critique games I'd worked on. Much of my critiques of my own games tend to be blunt, and not being able to speak on them felt unnatural to me. The company involvement silence worried me more, however, as it meant that if anything illegal happened with those companies, this could be serious charges like accounting issues, silence on harassment issues with regard to employees, perjury related to the company documents and payouts, I couldn't speak about the issue, even if I felt strongly against what was being revealed. While this is good for Obsidian's upper management, and is what sometimes is considered good business, I did feel it showed a lack of ethics. I had set aside a legal fund to deal with any repercussions, and I will fight anything they bring to the table tooth and nail. I welcome it. Paradox has already been in touch. and they aren't too happy with how Obsidian handled the work they asked for. Future revelations like this will be much more fun than mine. Chris was also asked about Obsidian's CEO, Fjargus Ukahart, and asked whether Chris was fired or if he had simply left. After raising some questions about company finances and other issues, Fjargus de-ownered me, which I didn't have a choice in, and then told, "But don't worry, we'll still allow you to work on Tyranny for us." And my response was, "That's okay. You can work on it by yourself." Before this seems unusual, de-ownering was actually a common threat tossed around, so it wasn't specific to me. If any owner raised objections to events going on, the response was often, "You don't sound like you want to be an owner anymore," and never addressed the actual issues being brought up. This shift in being de-ownered coincided with taking place shortly before the first royalty payouts from Eternity came in, which meant that the surviving owners got a much larger share with me de-ownered. I don't mind that, as I didn't want the royalty payments for Eternity, but I don't think the other owners deserve the royalties either. Except maybe a set amount for Darren for the backer portal he put in. The team deserved all of it. It was a good business decision, but not good ethics. What I've spoken about is only about 30% of what transpired, along with other issues. The other amount I would, however, support, speak to, and be willing to testify to if it came to it, but it's up to the others to bring those issues up. If they do, I'm happy to help however I can, and they can count on my support. Fjargus did try to have both his young children added as employees at the studio during my last year there, but the other owners fought back and made it clear that 1, not only was it illegal because of the age requirements, 2, there was no way to defend against someone being able to prove his 2 children didn't work there, but most importantly, on a higher level, it was seen as unethical and wrong to try and do. The conversations about this were difficult because it was an issue related to employment plus family, which made an otherwise easy decision of no increasingly angry and complicated, which was frustrating. It was something that shouldn't have been suggested, discussed, or brought up at all. The de-ownering separation contract I was given was pretty strict. Among the first elements I had objected to was that the contract had a "you must sign this in 10 days or else you get nothing." To be fair, they were pushing for a swift resolution along with the NDA, which again is good business. And according to discussions after the departure, that clause seemed to have worked with other employees who didn't check. What was troublesome was that the NDA wasn't mutual despite the mutual separation agreement. They could say whatever they wanted, but I would have no legal recourse. Not only about that, but anything, which understandably made me uncomfortable. As I said, the 10 days or else did not turn out to be legally binding when confronted on, and may have been dropped, but that was the specs of the contract I was hit with. If I had signed the first de-ownering contract, however, with the non-competes, the problem would be that Tyranny would be the only actual RPG I would have to work on, and any other Obsidian-sponsored RPGs they chose to exclude from the de-ownering agreement. So rather than be an olive branch, it was more, here's how we own you twice. Still get you to write as always, but at a fraction of the cost. Fjargus went through what I feel may have been poor training as a studio lead at Black Isle. In that position, he had more control over the projects, the funding, and more importantly, outside developers. In his role at Interplay, he was very much the publisher, and he was one of the ones that made the call on BG1, BG2, etc. He controlled the funding, could make demands, could withhold payments, and also force capitulations in features and schedules. Unfortunately, I believe this set a bad precedent for Fjargus dealing with publishers in the future because we became one of the same outside developers he had formerly overseen when he was a publisher. The roles were reversed, and so was the power. Suddenly, he had to experience it from the other side, and he didn't take it too well. The control was gone, and suddenly his demands could be ignored and fought rather than accepted. The leverage was gone. Even more importantly, Fjargus's behavior no longer had to be ignored by the person on the other end of the phone or in discussions in the conference room, where once, if Fjargus asked a developer or contractor to do something, they would largely have to swallow it or fight to be polite in order to get paid or keep their project going. The reverse was very hard for Fjargus to deal with and led to a lot of shouting matches, which you could hear down the hall, and even hanging up on publishers. We knew about this because he'd come brag to us when he had hung up on a studio or producer, which made me even more depressed, since it meant we'd likely lose another contract with no backup plans. Worse, Fjargus didn't learn from this. Instead, he passed the behavior along. When Fjargus was in charge of outsourcing and other remote contracts, he behaved much like the publishers he railed against, which was depressing as well. Overall, the position of having to answer to someone else didn't often go well, and it's much of the reason I think Obsidian would be better off finding a way to completely self-publish their games, because I don't think any other option is going to work for them in the long term. It went beyond transparency and finances. The biggest shock came when the matter arose about paying back the employees, not the owners, but the employees, who had given up their paychecks to keep Obsidian from going bankrupt. When we did start getting the money in the bank again after this bleak period, however, the company's spending began accelerating again. This made me uncomfortable. So at the time when our finances became healthy again, I brought up that since we had the means to do so, we should pay back the employees who gave up their paychecks to keep us going. My comment was met with silence by all the owners. I repeated the concern, but when I brought it all up again, Fjargus simply said, "We never promised we'd pay the employees back." As if that excused things, but paying the employees back didn't seem like a technicality to me. This was the right thing to do. He then said he wanted the matter dropped. Fortunately, another owner did finally admit he agreed with me some time later. He was someone Fargus would listen to, and when he brought it all up, we were able to push Fargus into establishing a payback plan and getting restitution for the employees who sacrificed for us. And this was all well before the owner paychecks resumed. By this point, the owners were resolved to not getting paid back, so it wasn't a huge shift. Overall, it seemed a shameful way to treat our employees who had sacrificed for us. I wasn't happy that we even had to discuss compensating them. It didn't seem like something that we should discuss. We should just simply do it because it was the right thing to do. Chris Avellone would then go on to complain about the nepotism within the company and that they would hire family members and this would cause issues. Issues of being inefficient, not handling criticism well, sharing some of the same bad habits, and generally overall just not being good for the productivity of the company. The article is very long and goes into a lot of detail about the inside works of Obsidian, and if you're interested, I highly recommend looking at it for yourself. It definitely can explain a lot of the complications that go on during game development. From what it sounds like, Fargus was somewhat of a corporate dictator surrounded by yes-men, using coercion and threats of de-owning to keep people in line, taking advantage of employees by having them surrender their pay to keep the company afloat, while never thinking about paying them back. De-owning Chris Avellone for bringing up these internal issues and attempting to have him sign a contract that would not only bar him from ever speaking about these unethical practices, but prevent him from ever working on an RPG game again for any company, the thing that Chris has done for the majority of his career, this seems a little above and beyond, and as Chris puts it, it was a way for them to own me twice. In another interview with RPG Codex, Chris says that even if he were offered to help on another Fallout Obsidian spinoff, he would decline because of the issues he has with upper management. And curiously enough, in this interview that took place in 2016, it ends with the interviewer asking Chris if he thinks Bethesda will attempt a Fallout MMO to fill the gap in between Fallout 5, to which Chris responds, "I think a Fallout MMO will do well." Something to keep in mind when you see the Obsidian vs Bethesda debate, a lot of people like to paint Todd Howard and Bethesda as greedy corporate heads who care more about how much profit they can make off the oldest possible engine available than they do the art of their craft, which is true to a certain point. But this doesn't mean that Obsidian is full of angels. They also participate in shady, unethical business practices that come at the expense of their employees, and sometimes their consumers. Chris Avellone never sold his soul though. Thankfully, this allows him to continue to work on RPG games, but has left him with little to show from his time with Obsidian, besides some pretty high-profile game credentials. Luckily, it doesn't look like his career is over, and he is currently working as a freelancer on several different projects, such as Prey, Pillars of Eternity, and Dying Light 2. Chris Avellone has proven his passion has no price, and that's something that should be admired.